We are in part 2 of a series on the biblical diet. And I think everyone would agree that dietary issues are important to all of us. It's part of the preoccupation of our entire culture that we live in. I mean, there's all kinds of diets out there when you think about it, right? People are into eating. They recognize it's important to eat right. Everyone wants to be healthy and strong and young and vibrant. And so diet plays a pretty big role in all of this. And so this whole issue of diet is super, super important, especially as followers of the Messiah. So I'm going to talk about the biblical diet. Last week we shared on God's diet. God has a diet that he gave to his people that he saved out of Egypt. Those that he saved, those that he called out, the ecclesia, the called out ones, were called to be his people. And he said, as my people, I want you to live different than you lived in Pharaoh's land. And part of that difference would engage them every day. It was a diet that he gave them. He gave them restrictions on what they could eat. We call that sanctifying. When you set something apart for a holy use, it becomes sanctified. It's set apart. Another word is sacred. It's sacred now. The diet God gave us is a sacred diet. It's sacred food. Food is holy. It's holy. There's something spiritual about food, not just physical, but spiritual about food. And since we eat multiple times a day, then that mechanism of a sacred diet would speak volumes to anyone that would embrace it, right? Sacred food for a sacred people. Now, we all know what happens, though, prior to that, if we went back. Originally, what we saw, and we saw this last week. In fact, let me just, I'll come back to that in a moment. But after the fall and the subsequent flood in Noah's day, God actually pretty much said, you can eat whatever you want. And it was a post-fall scenario. Because of the fall, because of rebellion, they had to start all over again. And in starting all over, God says, you know what? It doesn't really matter what you eat. You all are in trouble, right? You did some bad things, and so we're kind of like rebooting this whole thing. And so at that time, they were able to eat anything and everything. As they go down into Egypt, though, and God saves them out of Egypt and says, do you want to be my people? It's then that he begins to restrict the diet that was given in Noah's day. And it's that restricted diet that becomes sacred and holy, and he gives it to his people. And that diet basically allowed them to eat certain types of animals both on land, in the sea, and in the air. And that was the restricted diet, a sacred diet that he gave to his people. All of those who were alienated from God were still permitted to eat anything they wanted to eat. The diet wasn't for the lost, the alienated. It was for his people that he saved out of Egypt. Everyone else can eat that which is an abomination, that which God says is detestable. That's what our president would call nasty food. That's nasty food. I don't think our president keeps the dietary laws, by the way. But anyway, detestable, abominable, nasty. Don't eat that stuff, right? That's what God says for his people. Now, if we go all the way back to the beginning, and we talked about it in Genesis, we have a case that you can make for veganism. That the diet that God gave to Adam and Eve in the garden was basically a plant-based, organic plant-based food. That's what they ate. Now that diet didn't last very long because of the fall and all that happened subsequently. But what we do find is this, that as we make our way down through history, we see that God modifies the diet for his purposes. And so, under Moses, we have a diet once again, a diet in which we're to live by. And that's very, very important for us to understand. And if I was to just put it in the short and skinny, it's basically organic, plant-based foods supplemented from time to time with some free-range beef, chicken, or lamb, bison, just eating the best, the most nutritious foods to maximize our health and well-being. So this would be basically, what God has for those whom he's redeemed. That's our present state that we're in. Okay, that's where we're at in terms of the timeline of our diet. Now, I do think, and I can only postulate, I can only speculate, I do think we're moving back to a vegan-based diet, in the glorious phase of the millennium, but that's yet to be seen. But I'll tell you, what God has given us is a good and sacred diet. Now, when I first discovered this, it was shock and awe. Had a friend who told me, you shouldn't eat pork. I think I was eating pepperoni pizza, and he says, man, that's like nasty. You shouldn't be having that. I'm thinking, what? What's wrong with you, bro? It's like, this ain't pizza unless it's pepperoni. You don't know what's good, right? And so I really had the task of basically trying to help him get free of this legalism over diet. And so I did. I quoted my favorite passage, Mark chapter 7, where Jesus declares all things clean. And he says, no, that's not actually what he's saying in that passage. And he gave me several reasons why it couldn't be stating what apparently he's saying. And as I began to look deeper and deeper into that, it was like, oh my gosh, it was like an earthquake. It was like, oh, I think he may be right. So I ran to several other passages to find comfort, only to revisit those with different ideas that he gave me about those passages. And all of a sudden I realized, I think I'm supposed to embrace this diet. I think this is from God. And Jesus hasn't done away with it. And so where would I start? Where do you start with a diet this immense? What do you do? Baby steps. My friend reminded me over and over and over, we're saved by grace. It's not a salvific issue. Don't get all uptight. Relax a little bit and just begin to take baby steps into the diet. Baby steps. So I thought, I'm starting with my green pork chili. Had my favorite restaurant. We'd go there every week. We'd have my favorite green chili pork dish, So I started with that. I thought, okay, I'm not eating pork anymore. I made my first step. I'm not eating pork. Still eating lobster, still eating shrimp, everything else, right? But got to start somewhere, right? So I said, I'm not going to eat pork. So when I went to the restaurant and they gave me my pork green chili plate, you know what I did? I took my fork and I took the chunks of pork. I stuck them in my mouth. I sucked all the green chili off, and then I put them in a little bowl next to the deal. That's what I was doing. Because I told my wife, she goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm not eating pork anymore. I know that's funny, but you got to start somewhere, right? It doesn't matter where you're at in your walk with God. It matters what direction are you going. Don't judge people where they're at. What direction are they going? If they're going the right direction, applaud them, encourage them, right? Yeah. Anyone that's ahead of us, we say legalist. Anyone that's behind us, lawless. Like we're the standard. Okay, so started doing that. Then I finally got to the place where I said, I'm not eating the chili if it was cooked in pork. Yeah. Then I found some restaurants that were doing some vegan green chili. My wife learned how to make chicken taste like pork. I was making chicken chili. Tastes just like my pork green chili, but it was chicken. It's amazing. So, over a period of time, we stepped more and more fully into this diet, and it did amazing things for us. It raised our awareness of our God and that we belong to him and he belongs to us. Because everywhere we went, we had to sort through the menu options, right? It's constantly engaging us with the idea that we're no longer our own. We belong to a great king who has a different way of life. So that spiritual dimension was just rocking us. And also our health was beginning to increase in substantial ways due to this new diet. So diet, yes, it's important. It's important. I'm not telling you what to do. In fact, I'll give you the words of the Apostle Paul. You work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. I'm still trying to work mine out, all right? But let's encourage each other on our journeys. Not judge each other, but encourage each other on our journey. So this week, I'm going to answer some questions. These are basic questions that we get all the time. You've probably wrestled with them yourself. Here's the first one. Didn't Jesus do away with these laws, nailing them to the cross? Didn't he declare all things clean so that we can now eat the detestable, abominable foods that were previously forbidden? I mean, just think of that for a moment. What did Jesus do for you? He set me free so I could have some bad soup. That doesn't sound like freedom, you know? If God says, don't eat that, it's nasty, and I said, but Jesus set me free so I could eat the nasty, that doesn't make sense, right? Today we're going to give some answers to these questions by reading the words of Jesus the Messiah in their literary and cultural Jewish context. It's a very different read in this context than the ethnically sanitized, de-Judaized Catholic and Protestant contexts. When you read commentaries from the Reformers, oftentimes you read them, and what they're interpreting in terms of Jesus' words is not Jesus in his Jewish context talking with Jewish people, but rather in their battle with their arguments with Rome. And their worldview, as they approach the text, has already been de-Judaized, ripped out of its Jewish context. And then all of a sudden we have Jesus saying all kinds of things that Jesus, the Jew, would never have said. Never have said. But because we read Catholic and Protestant commentaries and that's part of our background, we're seduced into these ideas that he's nailed the law to the cross. That freedom is the freedom now to do the very things that God says you shouldn't do. That's actually the opposite. True freedom is being able to do what God calls us to do and to say no to the sin and the rebellion that entangles us. So let's begin. I want to begin with a text everyone's familiar with. It's one of the cardinal texts within Messianic Judaism. It's Matthew 5:17 through 18. Do you not think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets? I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I'm not going to do away with the law. I'm not nailing the law to the cross. I'm going to be nailed to the cross. Not the law. I'm going to take your sin on myself, and then I'm going to be nailed and suffer the debt that you owe. I'm not doing away with the law. I'm going to fulfill it. I'm going to establish it in its fullest sense and meaning. Verse 18, for truly, truly, I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. The law is here. It's not going anywhere. Till the heaven and the earth pass away, it's still here. When I get up in the morning, I jump. I make sure the earth is still here. And it is, so I'm going to do the Torah. But one of these days when I jump and it's all gone, then I'll say, okay, I think there's some significant shifts in terms of the Torah and how it applies to our lives, right? The heavens and the earth are going to pass away first before the Torah passes away. And I've got to accomplish all things which, by the way, he has much still to accomplish that's prophesied that he will accomplish. And until all is accomplished, the Torah is not being done away with. Not one jot, not one iota, not one dot. Chapter 5 and verse 19. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. It's not a salvific issue. They're still in the kingdom. Those that say, the dietary law has been done away with, they haven't lost their salvation. It's not a salvific issue. They've lost their standing as a teacher. They're not going to be called a great teacher in the kingdom. They're going to be called one of the least in the kingdom, one of the lightweights, a novice, a practicing teacher, an assistant teacher. But whoever does them and teaches them, whoever does them and then also teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Mark chapter 7. I'm going to read the chapter first, and then we'll unpack it. So bear with me. Mark chapter 7, 1 through 23. Now the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem. They saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other traditions that they observe, such as the washing of cups and pots and copper vessels and dining couches. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, "Why do your disciples walk according to the why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?" And he said to them, "Well did Isaiah prophesy of you, hypocrites, as it is written, 'This people honors me with their lips, but with their hearts they are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men.'" I'm going to go down to verse number 14. And he called the people to him again and said, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside of a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asking him about the parable he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart but his stomach and is expelled?" And then in parentheses it says, "Thus he declared all foods clean." I'll come back to the parenthetical statement. Verse 20. And he said to them, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. From within, out of the heart of a man, comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within, and they defile a person." So let's unpack this. Let's start with the context of our passage. The speaker is Jesus the Jew. He's a Jewish man. He's a religious Jewish man. He's an observant Jewish man. And who's he talking to? Jewish observant disciples, Jewish observant Pharisees, Jewish observant scribes. And what are they talking about? Jewish things. That's our context. Understanding the context is very important. Jewish religious men talking to each other about Jewish dietary issues. So let's look and see specifically what the subject matter is. Verses 1 and 2. Now when the Pharisees gathered to him with some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem, they saw that some of his disciples ate with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The issue is what? It's washing. It's not a dietary issue, it's washing. Hey, your Jewish disciples are eating their food and their hands have not been washed properly. Now, the traditions of the elders, I think, had 5 pages of ceremonial hand washing. Quite elaborate how you wash your hands. If you've ever been to a kosher restaurant, they actually have a place where you can wash ceremonially your hands. And you'll see observant Jews do that. You do that a certain way. There's protocol in terms of how you do that. And so in the first century, according to the Pharisees, if you didn't wash your hands as a Jewish person before you ate your kosher food, what do you think they were eating? Ham sandwiches? They're Jewish. They're eating kosher food with unwashed hands, and that's the issue. And because they did not wash their hands ceremonially, according to the tradition of the elders, the oral traditions, his Pharisees are saying their hands, not properly being washed, are defiled. And when they grab their lamb sandwich or whatever their kosher food was, when they grab that and begin to eat it, they cross-contaminate the food with their defiled hands. Now their food's defiled, and they're putting it in their mouths, taking it into themselves, defiling themselves. So this is the issue. The issue at stake here is, can unwashed hands contaminate your kosher food and thus defile you when you eat it? That's the subject matter of Mark chapter 7. Ding, 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 ding. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Verse 5. And the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? 14 and 15. And he called the people to him again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand that there is nothing outside of a person that by going into him can defile him. But things that come out of a person are what defile him. Leave that up for one moment. Notice, there's nothing outside of a person that could go into him and defile him. Nothing outside of a person. Now we got to qualify nothing. What does the word nothing mean? What's our context? Jewish men eating their Jewish food. The nothing is the food they're eating. It's talking about kosher food. Food that God ordained that says is appropriate to eat. And Jesus is saying, food that God has declared clean and holy and edible can never defile you going into you. Even if your hands aren't washed and are defiled under your definitions, even if that was true, it still can't defile a person. Does that make sense? Mark 7, 17 through 19. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Do you not see whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him? Verse 19, he begins to explain this to them. Since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. It can't defile him because it doesn't go into his heart. It's a food issue, not a heart issue. It doesn't go into his spirit. It goes somewhere else. His mouth is connected to the esophagus, which is connected to the stomach. We'll just stop right there. Jesus is saying there's a digestive system by the design of God meant to collect that might defile you. And it passes through you into the latrine and is expelled. Thus he declared all foods clean. Now let's talk about this for a moment. He's not talking about what you can eat. He's talking about eating clean food with unwashed hands. So when he declares all things clean, how are we to understand that? Well, the first way is that what he's saying is all clean food remains clean even if you don't wash your hands. Even though they say, food's defiled, he's saying, I'm declaring it clean. I'm declaring all clean food clean, even though you've called it defiled. Thus, I've declared all food clean. That's one way to look at that passage. The second way is to connect the line of reasoning that he's always used, because in different manuscripts, you have some different wording and grammar, which tells a little bit different story. Okay, so if we were to follow the idea that it enters the stomach, goes through the intestinal tract, and then is expelled, goes into the latrine, some translations actually will use that terminology because of the text, the Greek text they're working from. Then actually it would read different. It's basically saying this: kosher food that has become defiled cannot defile you because it bypasses the heart, enters the stomach, and ends up in the toilet, safe and sound and away from you, so that you're not defiled. Two different ways to read it. Neither of those ways in any way can be read that he's changing the dietary laws. The context doesn't allow for that interpretation. It's not within view. The only way is you got to strip it of its Jewish background, the antecedent Jewish theology and framework, the culture, and then make it say something it's not saying at all. And that's normally what's done with this passage. Now, recently listening in a seminar to a PhD in Hebrew studies that was working with this passage, was basically saying that when Jesus declared all foods clean, he was saying it's okay to eat ham sandwiches. I know that's not offensive. It's okay to eat mice sandwiches. Is that a little bit more offensive? Or bat sandwiches? It's the same effect. You're eating something that God says don't eat. Okay? Now, is that what God's saying? So we ask the question, well, isn't Jesus Jewish? And his disciples Jewish? And the Pharisees Jewish? And doesn't the beginning of the passage say the issue at hand is not the food, but they're eating with unwashed hands? Well, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think the reason we understand it the way that we do is because this editorial remark made by Mark that says, thus he declared all foods clean, is in parentheses. What that tells us is that Mark didn't write his gospel for what? 40 years, maybe 50 years after the event, which gave Mark the opportunity to hear about Peter's vision, where God cleansed all the unclean foods. And then Peter working with the Gentiles, bringing Gentiles in. It took a while, but Mark finally caught it. It took decades for Mark, but he finally caught it. So he inserts later when he writes his editorial comment that what Jesus is doing is declaring all foods clean. So I said, well, that's interesting because isn't Mark Jewish? And if Mark's Jewish, why would he put that in the words of Jesus? Why would he put that phrase back into the words of Jesus in Mark 7 when he as a Jew knows that's not the context either? He says, actually you bring up a good point, and I just want to admit, just go on the record and admit, I really don't know what the answer is. I thought that was honest. And that here's an honest scholar really wrestling with the issues. And it's true. And so these are big issues. They're complicated, but I think the way we sort them out is by going back to the context in which they were written and understanding that first century Jewish context, reading Jesus within his own cultural environment and tradition, antecedent theology. That's how we sort these things out. And a lot of scholarship, a lot of ink is being spilled on these type of subjects. And with people moving back to the Jewish roots of their faith, things are changing. I'm so excited about this. So excited. Give you two translations. The first one is the EHV. I think it's the Evangelical Heritage Version. For it does not enter his heart, but goes into his stomach and goes out of him into the latrine. A little bit different read. Right in line with the context, just like the previous read is right. Either way you interpret, both of those fit the context. In this way, all foods are purified. In, out. All foods are cleansed. All foods are purged. The good stays in and the bad goes away. Same with the Jubilee translation. Because it enters not into his heart, but into his belly, and the man goes out to the privy and purges all foods. Didn't think the British were back. Never mind. Okay, verse 20. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. From within, for from within, out of the heart, comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within, and they are what defile a person. Clean foods never defile you. Even if they become contaminated, cannot defile you. ritual uncleanness is a matter, but it's not the same as intrinsic uncleanness. We'll talk about those differences next week when we get to those. But in summary, let me just state this. Kosher, and the word kosher is an interesting word. It's laden with a lot of passion. Kosher simply means appropriate to eat. Now, when you think of the Orthodox and their version of kosher, it's pretty strict. I'm not suggesting that we're to follow the halakhic rulings of the Orthodox. They're so intense, it'd take a lifetime just to begin to grapple and understand them. It would take generations to really walk them in good faith. Jesus said, my halacha is light and easy. Come to me, I'll give you rest. I simplified it, made it easy to do. And so when I talk about kosher, I'm talking about what has the Father said is appropriate to eat. And then let's look at what Jesus has given us, Yeshua the Messiah. It's a really easy approach to this. It doesn't have 10,000 fences around it, making it virtually impossible. So when I talk about eating kosher biblically, I'm not talking about eating kosher according to the Orthodox. Okay? And they're mostly concerned with slaughter. Was the animal slaughtered right? Right? And the way they approach everything else is not very healthy. Don't ever connect kosher with healthy when you're thinking of Orthodox halacha. Okay? It's ritually pure. It's designed to focus on ritual, not health. The newer approaches to kosher that you find in the Reform camps and other groups is much closer to the idea that I think God had in mind, and that is this. Eat according to my design. Make sure the animal's treated properly, cared for, that the worker gets his wages, that it's eco-friendly. There's a lot that goes into eating healthy according to God's design. That's what we're after. And it's a really gracious and simple approach to eating. So, the next time someone says, it's okay to eat whatever you want because Jesus declared all things clean, I want to encourage you to share some of these ideas. Because what you're learning is not just for you. It's so you can share with those around you, so that they can find and experience the liberty of God's ways. Because his ways are good ways. They are good. Never use them to judge other people. These are not designed to judge anyone. They're designed to help you and me and our community grow in the grace and knowledge of the Messiah, and to share those with others so they might experience the same thing. So, I'm going to ask one of our members to come up and share with us a little bit about her journey, her family's journey, and she's going to share some things about her pilgrimage into the dietary laws. So please welcome Melanie Gable. Okay, so Melanie, just real quick, give us a brief background. Welcome. And so how long have you been born again? How long have you been a Christian?
Okay, I guess I was born into the church, and so I don't have an age, you know. My mother that was the piano player, my father was always the deacon of the church, and I started singing when I was 4 years old. And so it's just who I was. It was always a part of me. And I don't know if it's an age thing. I'm just getting too old that I can't remember. Maybe there was that moment in my life that I had written down. I don't know. Maybe it's in a growing up box somewhere.
Yeah.
But
you know, most of us come to a place where we accept Jesus. It's a very fortunate blessing, though, to be raised in a family where from your earliest recollections, you were in love with Jesus. That is a tremendous blessing. My daughters had that opportunity. I did not have that, but most of us don't. But that's great. I did not know that. So from your earliest beginnings, you were like in love with Jesus and grew up in a Christian context.
I grew up in a Christian home, but I also have to say that
I want you to step up.
I've learned that God says, if you love me, you keep my commandments. And I don't know that I had a grasp of what his commandments were. So in one hand, yeah, I was in church, but I don't know if I truly love the Lord because I didn't keep a lot of his commandments. So I wrestle with that. Honestly, I think it's when God brought me down this journey of leaving my Christian past into the Messianic church that for the first time he showed me, I think he showed me, it's not that I saw it, he revealed to me who he is, what his commandments are. He showed me how to love him. And I'm believing I was saved before that. Part of me, I don't know. But now I know his commandments, and I do my best to keep them, which means to uphold them, right?
So tell us a little bit about that aha moment when you said, "Oh, a diet? God has a diet." Was that upsetting to you? I mean, how did that impact you? What was your initial feelings?
Well, I guess for me, it all hit at once. It was a whirlwind. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm not one to put in a couple toes. You just give it to me like it is, and I'm jumping in. And so
Now that's the opposite of me.
that's
I'm sucking the pork, but not eating it.
yeah.
You know, it's like I'm doing baby steps. It's gonna take me a decade or so, you know. But
Okay.
so you kind of jump in.
I jump
Okay.
in, but there is knowledge that comes with it. So sometimes when we think we're jumping in and we're doing it right, we still have that journey
Yes.
of learning what God has to say about it. It's that journey where we grow. When we grow, then we can walk closer with the Lord in it, right? And so that aha moment came probably about 8 years ago, and it came, how do I make this short? It came at a time in my life when I asked the Lord to bring truth into my life. I'm going to get emotional, Pastor Mark.
Please, it got Kleenex up here. Let me get some just in case.
I'm a big crybaby.
You go right now. Get some just in case.
Okay.
Okay.
Just in case.
We might have
Give me the
averted
whole
it.
box.
Okay.
The Lord brought me to a place where I prayed, show me truth, Lord. I see all these things around me, these people around me, and they're not living in truth. My eyes were opened, and I was at a place where I was on my knees. Lord, just show me who you are. I don't care what it is. I don't care what your laws are. I don't care where you bring me. You know, just show me, reveal to me who you are and what that is. And I'm there. I'm there with both feet. And whoa, did the Lord do a number, because he took the scales from my eyes, he removed them, and I saw who he was. I almost felt like instantly I was like, okay, now what? Now what? And thank the Lord that he brought me to the harvest with a pastor who's an amazing teacher, and that's what I needed, was a teacher, somebody to teach me God's laws, who the heart of God was, to teach hermeneutics, to understand. I first needed that heart to say, I'm here, Lord. Show me what you want to teach me. Then came the head knowledge of, okay, everything that I had learned, I needed to unlearn. So now it was time to jump in, to learn Scripture, to learn it the way, just as we were talking about today, all of the New Testament. I had misunderstood probably a good portion of that. When it relates, specifically to the dietary laws, I understood the passages as anyone else did previously. Yeah. And then it was an understanding of this is a Jewish thing, right? Lord, the food laws aren't they Jewish? And then I came to the understanding through the help of the church and through staff that the dietary laws Noah was aware of. This wasn't just a Jewish thing. If Noah knew what was clean and unclean when he was bringing the animals onto the ark, this went further back. And so I prayed that the Lord would reveal to me The pork was easy. That was an easy thing to give up.
Okay, so you were eating. So tell some of the nasty foods you were eating. Pork. That's.
Well, at that time,
And listen. If you're eating some nasty food, we're not judging you. Nasty is tasty. Okay, we get it. We're talking about a pilgrimage though, and something that's healthier. Okay.
I grew up on pork chops.
Okay.
And I'm a Washingtonian. I grew up on the coast, and I grew up. We would go down to the sand spit, and we would take our shovels, and we would dig up our seafood. And
what would you find in there?
What's that? Oh, lots of really disgusting clams and oysters, and just we would eat it all. It's just how I grew up, right?
Sure.
It's tradition. And the pork was at first, that was easy to give up. I'm not sure why. Yeah. Crab legs were the hardest. And I like those.
How many crab leg eaters that are saying that was hard to give up?
That was really hard.
You know, the easy thing about crab was when I realized it's a species of spider in terms of the water. And so once I started thinking big spider, then I thought, I think I can get over that one.
Right. And then once you start learning why God says don't eat these things, when you do your research on really how disgusting they are, and that they are God's vacuum cleaners. They have been created to take care of the earth, to clean the earth. There are certain birds of the sky, and there are fish in the sea. There are animals that roam the land, and they are here to purify and detoxify, and all of that. They have a certain mechanism in them where they hold on to those toxins. And when we eat those, we become toxic. It causes, it wreaks havoc really on our systems. And so, they're full of parasites and bacteria and viruses, all kinds of wonderful things. And that was the journey, Pastor Mark, was once you learn really how gross they are and how bad they are for your body, that was easy for me to eliminate because health has always been important to me.
Yes.
And that was just the beginning of the adventure because some of it is what you don't eat. And then there are certain things that when you take the step further with nutrition, you'll find out what your body does need in addition, vitamins and minerals and everything else to
Good.
function.
We got a few minutes. Real quick, do you have a funny story in your pilgrimage with?
I think the only funny story I have, Michaela's laughing back there. I think it was our first week that we had come, I believe. She'll probably correct me later. And my kids, we're still learning, right? We're on this journey like everybody else. And I believe Jessica was the teacher. And she was going around the circle and having all the kids shout out, what is your favorite food? And of course, both of my children let the whole class know that shrimp tempura was their favorite, and I believe Jessica moved on really quickly from that conversation. That was the end of that. So I don't have one personally, but that's the one thing that stands out.
That's great. That's a great story. They say, Gentiles, when sons come home late at night, their mothers are always up because they want to hug their son before he goes to bed, right? But the hug is really a smokescreen. They're really sniffing for alcohol or dope, right? But in the Jewish world, it's the opposite. The son comes home, the Jewish mother hugs. She's trying to smell for bacon and shrimp, It's a little bit different. Both are concerned mothers, okay? We'll just leave it at that. So, all right. So real quick, a word of encouragement that you would offer to someone who's saying, wow, this is all new to me. I'm like just starting to hear this for the first time. Wow. Word of encouragement.
I guess my word of encouragement is you can do it. God's laws with the right heart are actually quite easy.
Yeah.
They're easy to follow. When you love him and you want to serve him, I say go to the Lord and say, please, Lord, show me your ways, show me your laws, reveal this to me. And honestly, what you think is going to be hard It's not. It's not. When you have God on your side, it's not hard. And if it was Pastor Mark, he would say, baby steps, right? But I'm going to say, dive in there. Just do it. God says it. God says it, so I'm going to do it. And I'm going to ask you, God says it, to do it, right? Because he wouldn't put anything in the word that would hurt us. If anything doesn't make sense, it's usually because of a lack of knowledge on our part. But he loves you. He wants the best for you. He wants a long and prosperous life for you. And a lot of that starts with the diet. It's what we eliminate from our diets. But then for the next sermon, it's what we add to our diets.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you. So in closing, I want to remind everyone we are saved by grace through faith, not by works. By grace, through faith alone in the Messiah. These are not salvific issues. They are lifestyle issues. So you're not saved or lost based on where you're at in embracing these type of laws. But it has everything to do with our health and our well-being and our happiness. That's what God's invested in, that his kids are healthy and happy. He's a good parent, just like we are. He loves us. So with that, Shabbat Shalom.
And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And we add in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah, the Prince of Peace. So they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Receive now the name of Yahweh. Yivorechecha Yahweh ve'yishmarecha Yaher Yahweh panav alecha ve'ichunecha Yisa Yahweh panav alecha vayasem lecha Shalom. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach Tzar HaShalom. Shabbat Shalom.